Brian Lin, my boyfriend, is a poverty-stricken lawyer who helps victims at his own expense. Everyone praises him as the most upright and kind treasure boy in the world. To subsidize his righteous cause, I work 3 jobs around the clock, even working part-time to deliver takeout after work. However, when I rushed to grab the express order to be sent to a luxury hotel, I found the recipient to be the boyfriend of the domestic violence victim I was supposed to meet with, and the order included 999 red roses, a bottle of red wine, and 10 small umbrellas. I left without a word. The next day, I got off the Maybach of the prince from the capital, and Brian Lin hurriedly grabbed my hand to explain, but I interrupted him and said I did not know him. Leo Fu quickly wrapped his arms around my waist next to me to assert his claim, saying that I took his first time and I'm not allowed to not take responsibility. I looked up and met Brian Lin's guilty gaze, and my heart seemed to stop for a moment. The temperature felt like over 40 degrees Celsius that day. I didn't even want to stop to buy a cold Coke to drink, as I was trying to complete a few more orders to supplement Brian Lin's business. But right now, I feel as if I've fallen into an ice cave, with the chill spreading from the bottom of my heart to my entire body. With just the money from those 10 small umbrellas and this order of his today, I could run around all day in the scorching summer heat. How ironic, I was thinking of talking to him about marriage over dinner tonight, and I just sent him a WeChat message saying I would make his favorite roasted prawns for a special dinner tonight, because a generous patron had tipped me 100 yuan. Little did I know that generous patron was him. My lips trembled, and I could not utter a single word, nor did I even notice when my eyes became reddened. Brian Lin furrowed his brow, pursed his lips in an attempt to conceal the embarrassment of being caught, then hastily glanced back into the house. He seemed more concerned about the person inside than comforting me, and he didn't even notice my cracked lips from dryness. Right now, he just wants to calm me down immediately, urge me to leave, and say that he will definitely explain to me later, and he really has work to deal with right now, which is inconvenient. I glanced at the order for 10 boxes of a certain lace, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it forcefully at Brian Lin, who lowered his head and did not dodge. The woman's coy voice from inside the house called for Brian Lin to come quickly, as she had already taken off her clothes. A strong wave of nausea surged up, and I forcibly controlled my trembling legs to move away. Racing home on a small electric scooter, the scenes of the past kept flashing in my mind. Brian Lin is my senior in college. He works hard and supports himself financially, and also self-funds the operation of a public welfare public account for legal aid, making him a well-known justice god on campus. Regardless of me or my friends around me, he is so attentive and considerate. Everyone says he is the most kind-hearted and most reliable good man. This sudden blow makes me wish I could trick myself into thinking it was just a nightmare. I held my breath and rushed back home, immediately throwing myself onto the bed and crying out loud, anguished. I don't know how long I've been crying, but finally I heard the sound of Brian Lin coming back home to change his shoes, which used to be the sound I looked forward to the most. He hugged me tightly from behind just like before, kissing my earlobe and whispering that today was just because the faucet at the abused girl's home was broken, which got their clothes wet, and they were rushing to get it fixed. Those flowers and things were just a prank she had ordered using his phone, as she had been abused and was in a poor mental state. He was afraid of further upsetting her, which is why he urged me to leave, as he knows I'm very kind-hearted. He also took out his phone and showed me that the screensaver was my photo, saying that he had repeatedly emphasized in front of others that I was his best helpmate. I really want to believe him, but is Brian Lin really treating me like a fool? I accompanied him for 5 whole years, to save him money. I never asked for a Valentine's Day gift, and I never complained, but he just waved his hand and gave someone else 999 red roses. My body shakes uncontrollably, from the intimate embrace of the previous night. Tonight it is as silent as the grave. Brian Lin's phone vibrated, and at this late hour, it could only be one person's message. The answer was obvious. The last line of defense was completely overwhelmed, and my emotions were like a glacier avalanche. I rushed out of the house and down the stairs, wanting only to escape this place with Brian Lin in it. Tears blurred my vision, a Maybach with dazzling headlights came straight at me, a dizzying whirl, and I fell to the ground. As consciousness was just regaining, I heard Brian Lin and a woman approaching the ward. I pretended to close my eyes and turn to the side to sleep, and through the slit of my eyes I saw that it was Mandy Sue, the female client who had been abused at home, that he had mentioned before. Brian Lin said that Su Mingchen has been with him for so many years, and he doesn't want to lose her. Mandy Sue also doesn't want to lose the compensation for domestic violence, right? Su Mingchen woke up and pretended to be pitiful, saying that he was going to help her. Mandy Sue comforted, as long as Brian Lin maintains the image of a righteous lawyer, this foolish girl will definitely give him anything and willingly believe in him. She can't forget how her sister died. The air seemed stagnant, and I felt a suffocating inability to breathe, with my mind completely blank. I clenched my teeth, desperately trying to hide my trembling lips. When I was young, my sister and I were orphans who depended on each other. My sister went to work in a factory alone to support my excellent academic performance in college. Unexpectedly, she encountered a ruthless boss who threatened and tempted her with long-term harassment. Sister sought legal aid, but the lawyer was bribed by the unscrupulous boss. Not only was the evidence destroyed, but he also turned the gun around and falsely accused the sister of defamation. The distraught sister, in a moment of deep despair, jumped off the building. These years, I have never forgotten my sister, and I have struggled hard to be admitted to the university's journalism department, determined to become a journalist who stands up for justice. I have never told anyone about my sister until I met Brian Lin, who shared the same values. These years I have been frugal and let Brian Lin help girls who are in the same distress as my sister. Whenever I wake up from my nightmare of my sister covered in blood, it is Brian Lin who holds me, covered in cold sweat, and comforts me over and over again. I never expected that the one I thought understood me best would use the sharpest knife to stab the heart I had completely opened to him. The pain in my heart was almost enough to make it stop. In a moment of daze, a pair of warm hands brushed across my forehead. The words spoken were quite anxious, saying that no matter how much it costs, they would give me the best medicine. It was he who had collided with me, it was his full responsibility, and he would cover all my medical expenses. This tone, this voice, it couldn't be. In the moment of hatred, anger, grief and surprise, when all emotions rushed to my head, I opened my eyes. I rubbed my head, pretending to open my eyes in pain, grabbing the man's sleeve in front of me, saying, "How did I end up here? Wasn't I attending the university graduation banquet with him?" Everyone present was stunned. Brian Lin, who was standing next to me, immediately turned pale, and he pulled Liu Fu away and asked me what I was saying and why I was with Liu Fu. I pulled back Brian Lin's tightly gripped wrist. His hands were soaked in Mandy Sue's perfume, which disgusted me. Mandy Sue interjected, saying that I didn't need to make Lin the lawyer nervous with the issue of amnesia, as the lawyer was just trying to comfort her in good faith, and that I was being too petty and misunderstanding him. I continued to act dazedly at Brian Lin, indicating that he was just the senior Lin from the law department, and that I didn't have much interaction with him. Brian Lin seems to be angry, unable to speak for a long time with his mouth open, his pale hands tightly grasping my wrist, with such force that his veins are visible. At this time, he still wanted to maintain the image of a decent boyfriend in front of others, which made me feel disgusted. I pried open his fingers in disgust, but under strong insistence, he made me check several times. The doctor insisted that I had no major problems, saying that if the patient had experienced too much stimulation, they would selectively forget the painful events that caused them suffering. Brian Lin did not believe it, saying that the painful thing could not have been him, and he was my favorite. I ignored Brian Lin and looked at Liu Fu pleadingly, saying I was tired and wanted to go home. Liu Fu was taken aback. A flash of surprise briefly crossed his face before he quickly composed himself. Brian Lin completely lost his composure, saying I couldn't go to another man's house, his nails digging into my hand, reaching out to Liu Fu. I firmly placed my aching hand in Liu Fu's warm palm and led him onto the Mercedes, leaving Brian Lin stunned in his place. Sitting in the car, I had escaped from Brian Lin, and I felt like I was breathing in fresh air. Through the faint lights of the night scenery outside the window, I looked at Liu Fu's profile. In the dim night light, his high-bridged nose and distinct jawline were somewhat blurred, like a young lord walking out of a phantom. He seems to be stuck in his university days, still the same carefree young master from the Beijing social circle. At that time, he pursued me publicly. I guessed that he would confess to me at the graduation party, but I ran away. That night, I was in a state of turmoil, afraid that he was just acting on a whim, and that it was by chance that he appeared in the library, where I saw Brian Lin like a lone warrior fighting for a girl seeking help, and I fell into the love trap without any defense. Liu Fu, who had been silent for a long time, spoke up, saying that he knew I was doing this to get back at Brian Lin, and that he had secretly asked the doctor to say that I had suffered trauma and forgotten who had hurt me. I awkwardly forced out a fake smile and said thank you for helping me out. He said this is compensation, the previous hotel was his family's, and he will have the manager arrange a top-floor suite for me. Good night. He spoke calmly and stopped the car steadily. My hand was pressed on the seatbelt buckle, and my emotions were being tossed about by memories. If I had chosen him, I would have sighed with a touch of regret. Leo Fu came close to help me with my seatbelt, and I could smell the familiar pear blossom fragrance on him. Thinking that he had been using this perfume because he knows I like it, I suspect that he still has feelings for me. Our gazes intertwined, finally resting on each other's lips, as we both swallowed nervously. I caught a glimpse of his slightly exposed chest below his open collar, and from just a short distance, I could clearly hear his breathing and heartbeat. Unexpectedly, I moved towards his lips, his Adam's apple trembled, his brow slightly furrowed, and he asked what I thought of him, but his body did not move away. I'm sorry, I was abrupt. I wanted to escape, but due to nervousness I bumped into the wound. Leo Fu anxiously examined the wound, as if he were restoring an antique. This moment, I am certain that he has not forgotten me for the entire 5 years since graduation. I mustered up my courage and embraced Leo Fu, kissing him on the neck instead of sending 10 small umbrellas to Brian Lin. He opened his eyes wide, his pale neck suddenly felt hot, his ears turned red, his hands were suspended in the air, not knowing what to do, and he still wanted to say something, but his mouth was blocked by my kiss. In the midst of our hurried breathing, he created a small gap and asked if going to the luxury suite upstairs was okay, to which I gently nodded. His hand visibly trembled as he swiped the card to open the hotel room door. The clothes peeled off one by one, and he impatiently yet anxiously unwrapped the gift he had been longing for years. My fingertips slid over his muscular chest and 8-pack abs, all the way down. He took a deep breath and buried his head in my collarbone, saying he couldn't hold back anymore. Leo Fu fell asleep quickly. Following the moonlight that crept in from the window, I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass window and saw the university basketball court. No wonder Leo Fu insisted on coming to this penthouse suite. It was the place where we spent our most precious years. He was a superstar athlete at the time, and during every halftime, he would walk through the crowd and come over to me, pretending to drink water. In my memory, he tilted his head, the sunlight danced on his hair, brightly and shyly peeking at me, and when our eyes met, he forcefully concealed his nervousness and pretended to look down nonchalantly. I tried to leave quietly, already putting on my clothes, when Leo Fu woke up and said I had abandoned him in front of the whole school before, and now I wanted to sneak away after taking his first time. I was surprised that he was a virgin and had taken the first night of the young master from the Beijing circle for free. Leo Fu's usually proud face flushed. After a long silence, he held my hand and said word by word, asking me not to leave him again this time. Brian Lin nearly blew up my phone when Leo Fu made a passionate confession. I was about to respond to Leo Fu, but my phone rang again. Leo Fu answered the call for me, and he had a nonchalant expression on his face as he spoke dismissively about Brian Lin sending an umbrella to Xiaoyu. The polite and gentle young master, who is usually as gentle as jade, is cursing and ranting on the other end of the phone, almost exploding. He questioned me about the current time, accused me of joking around with other men, and said he had a lot to say to me, believing that I couldn't possibly have truly forgotten him. Leo Fu hung up the phone without the slightest care, and casually deleted the over 100 voicemail messages from Brian Lin. He gently kissed every inch of my body, and when he reached my eyes, he noticed they were wet. The usually carefree young master's tone was now lowered to the dust, even with a hint of choking. I turned my face away, avoiding his scorching, burning gaze, and tears flowed out again. I used to send WeChat messages to Brian Lin every day, but he would reply with indifference after a long time. I had an accident while riding an electric bike and hurt my knee, with blood all over it. I tried to reach out to him via WeChat and phone calls but couldn't find him. In the end, I had to go to the hospital and treat the wound myself. He only briefly asked about it when he got home much later. I used to be understanding of his work and was happy to care for him, but now I have lost my heart for him, and he has started to care for me, which I find too foolish and ridiculous. Leo Fu did not continue to kiss me, nor did he leave. He quietly stayed with me all night. He opened his phone to show me that his company had listened to my initiative in the student union during my university days, and had set up specialized psychological and legal guidance for female college graduates entering the job market, as well as established an assistance fund committee to provide free legal consultation services for those in need. He said he was curious why I was so passionate about helping girls when I was in college, and later realized that kindness may not need a reason, and liking someone may not need a reason either. My heart skipped a beat. It turns out the people who have been supporting me have been waiting for me all along. I want to tell Leo Fu's sister's story, but I don't know where to start. Leo Fu leaned my head on his shoulder, saying it doesn't matter whether I say anything or not, and he will support whatever I choose, with or without a reason. The phone rang again. This time it was Brian Lin. His friend said that Brian Lin was beaten to the point of a bone fracture while trying to help the victim get justice. They told me to go there quickly. I agreed, and Leo Fu's eyes immediately dimmed, like a aggrieved little puppy. He thinks I was faking it at the hospital, that I was annoyed with Brian Lin, or that I still cared about Brian Lin. I couldn't help but laugh at him, and I said let's go see a play, and the puppy's eyes immediately lit up. After I entered the door, Brian Lin grasped my wrists with both hands and said he knew I cared about him, and that he hurried over as soon as he heard that he was injured. Leo Fu, who was following behind me, glared menacingly at Brian Lin's hand. I pried open Brian Lin's fingers and calmly said that I heard he was injured, and Leo Fu and I came from the hotel to visit him. Brian Lin was about to jump up on the spot. His gaze was about to tear Leo Fu apart, and he raised his hand to pounce on him, but his friend stopped him, saying that Brian Lin loved me so much, and I should know what kind of person he was, and that I must have misunderstood him. He also said that Brian Lin often gets angry but never raises his hand, and now it's just a case of care leading to confusion, and I shouldn't have forgotten him. I was previously hit by an electric bike going in the opposite direction. The other party was unreasonable and irrational, but Brian Lin calmly analyzed the legal provisions with them. Others praised him for being calm, but now it seems he just didn't care much about me and was certain that I couldn't leave him. I looked at him with a cold eye, as he was anxious and out of control. I impatiently curled my lips and asked him what he called us here for. Brian Lin's eyes flashed with a hint of scarlet, and he said eagerly, "The doctor said I just momentarily got startled and forgot some things, and he will help me remember." At this moment, he firmly believed that I, who was once deeply in love with him, could not have forgotten him, and gestured to his good brother to play the projection screen. In this small room of about 10 square meters, the white wall in front of the bed is the screen. Although it is simple, snuggling up in bed with Brian Lin to watch movies on weekends was my happiest moments. The photos of me and Brian Lin were displayed on the screen, and he was speaking at length, but I remained expressionless. All these years, I've been through so much hardship with him. I only remember the 40-degree summer, when I spent $100 to send a small umbrella for him and another woman. Brian Lin said about the keychain, "It is the one we caught in the claw machine on the first day we moved into this house." I couldn't stand it anymore and interrupted him, saying it's impossible that I've been staying in this shitty house with him for 5 years, and also said my boyfriend is the prince of several 5-star hotels. Brian Lin was stunned, his eyes wide open. His good friend interjected, saying that I have always been Brian Lin's wise consort in their hearts. I obtained dual degrees in journalism and law from a 985 university, received scholarships every year, and my published news articles frequently made headlines. However, in the eyes of others, I am only Lin the lawyer's dutiful wife, and outsiders only know that he provides financial assistance to victims, but they don't know that most of the household income is earned by me. I was too blinded by him in the past, obsessed with his career, and forgot about myself, making everyone think my sacrifices for him were only natural. The fellows present stood up for Brian Lin. After a long time, Brian Lin swallowed and said calmly that there was just a small misunderstanding between us. After being together for 5 years, I will not leave him. Even if I start over, I will still choose him. I lightly chuckled, casually adjusting my collar. Brian Lin wanted to say something more, but his gaze fell on my collar, and the unfinished words were swallowed back. He saw that my neck was bare. The necklace he had made for me with his own hands and which I never took off was gone. Brian Lin unconsciously covered the one on his chest, his fingers trembling, his hand shaking as if he had received an electric shock. "This is our first couple's necklace after the exchange, with each other's names engraved on it. This necklace, costing less than $100, was my prized possession and I never parted with it." Brian Lin was like a blue and white porcelain that was about to shatter, staring at me blankly, his fingers slowly raising towards my direction. He opened his mouth, but it took him a while to say a complete sentence, asking me if I had lost the necklace. I said to throw away that ugly pendant, "It's too tacky." Brian Lynn seemed to have lost all his strength, stumbling and retreating. The dignified and gentle Mr. Lynn, who was usually composed, lost his composure in public for the first time. His face was deathly pale, and he tremblingly grasped my chin, turning my head to face him, asking me if I had truly forgotten him. I did not respond to Brian Lynn and turned and left. When Brian Lynn approached me, I saw a strand of hair in his collar, a righteous lawyer who pretends to be a loving husband in front of his classmates, yet he continues to have an affair while begging me to change my mind. My illusions about Brian Lynn have been completely shattered, and the details that I had previously overlooked are now weighing heavily on my mind. That day, I and Brian Lynn encountered Mandy Sue covering her face. I took the initiative to offer help, but it was Brian Lynn who accompanied Mandy Sue to have her injuries examined. Were they really acquainted on that day? It was premeditated, deliberately letting me catch them, relying on my empathy, allowing Mandy Sue to use being beaten as the reason to openly take away Brian Lynn, who was on a date with me. Was Mandy Sue really a victim of domestic violence? Brian Lynn can hold my money and flirt with other women, he may also take money from other women. Once trust is compromised, it can crumble at any moment. Leo Fu noticed that I was frowning and asked if there was anything he could help me with. I expressed my doubts to him. He is indeed the young master of the Beijing Circle. With just a word from him, the private detective was able to get to the bottom of the matter. Originally, Mandy Sue and her ex-husband did have disputes, but under the guidance of Brian Lynn, they exacerbated their injuries, they walked in the legal gray area, and distorted the facts to obtain a $2 million settlement. Brian Lynn received $1 million on Thursday, according to the bank's investigation. On Thursday, I worked hard to earn money in order to marry him, but he was celebrating the division of spoils with another woman. Not long ago, I saw Brian Lynn give a thumbs up to his little brother's post, which said that selfish elites who can be satisfied for $1 will definitely not spend a penny more for him. At the time, I did not understand its meaning. It turned out that in Brian Lynn's eyes, I was just someone who could be dealt with for $1. I clenched my fists, trembling with anger. Leo Fu nervously looked at me, embraced me gently and said, "Let me take you back to your real home. I've kept the key for you, and tonight I'll make you satisfied." His ears flushed red. I want to break free, but he holds me tighter, using his sharp nose to nuzzle my cheek, his lips approaching, and I turn my face away. He asked me if I still loved that scumbag, and I said I no longer loved him, but I couldn't accept a new relationship at the moment. Leo Fu suddenly domineeringly bit my earlobe, his tone almost pleading, telling me not to say anything. The arrogant prince bowed his head before me. "I'm sorry," Leo Fu said. "He will wait for me, no matter how long. This time he won't let me run away." He then released his grip, slowly retreating, facing me with a half smile, a broken smile. He said for me to rest well in the villa, that no one would disturb me, including him. I watched him turn and walk towards the door until his figure faded, without calling out his name. I collapsed onto the bed, deeply distressed. Compared to being harmed by Brian Lynn, I regret getting involved with Leo Fu more. I thought he was a playboy, that our relationship was a fleeting one, but unexpectedly he is a pure love warrior. After tossing and turning for 2 days, I finally fell into a restless sleep. My sister crawled towards me, drenched in blood, in my dream, begging me to save her, not to be deceived by the lawyer. I woke up from a dream, tears streaming down like rain. Brian Lynn, the lawyer I once considered the most righteous, is no different from the person who harmed my sister. The phone keeps vibrating, it's a message from the alumni group. The junior disciples who received help from Brian Lynn stood up for him. The greedy person climbed up the circles of the capital and abandoned their kind-hearted spouse. Brian Lynn silently enjoyed the compliments of others in the group, sucking my blood. I did not originally understand why he was like this, but now I can see the signs. Perhaps at first he was an upright and promising young lawyer, but years of poverty have extinguished his original aspirations. His classmates' flattery, the admiration of his junior schoolmates, and my ardent adoration made him increasingly unwilling to give up the title of Holy Mother, leading him to the abyss. I dialed the familiar phone number again to meet up with Brian Lynn and chat. After a pause on the other end of the phone, there was a sense of imminent satisfaction, and he told me to go home and wait for him. Brian Lynn was beaming with pride when he saw me, holding the rose he had finally bought for me after 5 years, as well as the handmade wedding dress I had been eyeing 2 years ago. At that time, my greatest wish was to have a home with the righteous Brian Lin. Now, this pure white wedding dress is held in his hands, and I only feel defiled. He said he had already explained the matter with Mandy Sue to me, and everyone believes him, asking why I don't believe him. He also engaged in moral blackmail. Unfortunately, I have the materials collected by Leo Fu about his irregular operations. I will throw the materials at him and tell him that I know their dirty secrets. Brian Lin was stunned for a moment, then angrily said that he had not lost his memory and was making such a fuss. After reviewing the information, his sense of pride and dissatisfaction were gone, leaving only a pale, haggard expression on his face. He asked me if I was looking for him. Brian Lin fell to the ground. I stood and scrutinized him, asking for his explanation. Brian Lin let out a mocking laugh, saying he had only done what all lawyers couldn't help but do. He just happened to be unlucky to be discovered by me. He said he originally did charity work to become a student president and find a good job, but everyone put him on a pedestal too high, and he's very tired. The money from his part-time job can't help those in need, and that guy is no good. Taking more compensation is robbing the rich to help the poor. I looked at his pompous demeanor with indifference, my heart unmoved. It is so easy for a person to turn to darkness, and there are so many reasons to violate the law while knowing it. Perhaps the lawyer who harmed his sister did not believe that he had killed his sister. I said that Brian Lin had desecrated my admiration for him and had become the person I despised the most. As soon as I spoke, Brian Lin seemed to be completely shattered, his eyes reddened to a frightening degree. He drew near and held my hand, asking me if I had no feelings for him, since we had been together for almost 6 years. I used to soften up when he would act that way, but this time it only leaves me feeling disgusted. I broke free, dropped the words I had already reported him and left. I applied to the company to travel abroad to collect international news and take a break. These years I have put all my time on Brian Lin. It has been a long time since I have been so invested in my work. The group chat that Brian Lin built when he was the student council president has been quite lively these days. It's all about the gossip of him losing his law license. Someone contacted me, I did not respond, and I left the group chat. That year I went abroad. I changed my phone, and apart from contacting the company, I had almost severed all connections with China. After returning to my country, I interviewed a female university student who had successfully defended her rights on her own. Her passionate approach to public welfare reminded me of my own battles alongside Brian Lin in the past, and also the Brian Lin I had seen at the aid station a few days earlier. He stooped over, his body thin and emaciated, his face weary as he looked through the employment materials provided by the assistance center. I had intended to pretend not to have seen his departure, but he glanced up and inadvertently caught sight of me, then quickly lowered his head. Halfway through the interview, the female college student's notebook dropped a card, and she carefully placed the card back in her notebook. I accidentally asked if it was a gift from her boyfriend. She replied that it was sent by an entrepreneur who taught them self-rescue. He founded the University Student Legal Aid Association and will send this card to each member. He hopes to reunite with the person in his heart. I have a feeling of both surprise and joy, carefully picking up the card, on which there is a familiar pear blossom fragrance, a pure white card with only one line of text, which is the address of that villa. Apparently, Leo Fu was still waiting for me. It seems that the lawyer who had harmed my sister was reported, and he had quietly helped me take revenge by investigating it. I arrived at the villa entrance and called Leo Fu's phone. To my surprise, this group president in his late 20s, who oversees a listed group of over 100 five-star luxury hotels in Beijing, was so excited when he received my call that he was at a loss for words. The person on the other end of the phone was silent for a moment before speaking, inquiring whether it was me and asking about my location. Within less than half an hour, he rushed to the villa outside the city, panting, his fair face flushed. When he ran towards me, the sunset light bathed him, just like the proud and vibrant him from our student days running towards me, reminding me of his carefree laughter and sweat-drenched form on the playing field in university. I strode towards him with large steps, and he embraced me tightly with deep affection. After a long time, he said that the matter with Su Mingchen would not last long, and that this time he might still be abandoned, his voice slightly trembling and accompanied by light panting. I giggled and kissed his cheek, and his ears immediately turned red. He asked what we are, what I am to him. I did not answer, hooked my index finger around his hand, and walked towards the villa. I said Leo Fu has made no progress in a year. He said I did not give him the opportunity to practice. Leo Fu's eyes looked aggrieved, and his bare body language made me unable to resist pouncing on him again. He was clumsy yet gentle beneath me, a stark contrast to his usual domineering manner as the CEO. His thin lips were nearly swollen from my kisses, and his repeated efforts to resist were irresistible. I say that tonight and every night from now on, I need to practice well. A wave of heat surged through my body again,